All right, let's get to the meat of quadratic equations, and that is how to solve them. And probably for many of you guys in high school, this was one of the worst things about Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. And that is because we have four main methods for solving quadratic equations: factoring, square root property, completing the square, and the quadratic formula. So why is square root property and quadratic formula glowing in green? And that is because that's all I really am getting you guys to focus on. While we can go through the completing the square and factoring into linear components, by and large, what you're going to use from this point forward ever in your analytical career, math career, collegiate career is going to be quadratic formula, but I do want to show you a few things with the square root property. All right, so what are the steps of the square root property? All right, so given ax squared plus c, so with the square root property, note there's no middle x term. We just have an x squared and we have a constant. All right, what we're going to do is move the constant c to the opposite side of the equation. We're going to divide both sides by the coefficient on x squared, which here is a, and then we're going to square root both sides. And you guys, it is so important to keep in mind this part right here. Do not forget the plus minus in front of the constant term. All right, so again, what does this say? This says first step is, I'm going to try to write this, is to move that constant term to the other side, then divide both sides by a, and then square root both sides, giving yourself a plus minus in front of the radical. And that is absolutely incredible handwriting. All right, so why do I have a picture of a graph up here for you? All right, it's the y-axis symmetry. When we have a parabola that does not have the middle x term, what that means is that the parabola is centered on the y-axis or has y-axis symmetry, and so we're getting two x-intercepts equally far apart from the y-axis. All right, so how do we go about solving them? Let's look at number one here. Given x squared equals 17, all right, there's really nothing I need to do here except square root both sides. When I square root both sides, I add a plus minus. I do need to ask myself, can I simplify the square root of 17? And of course the answer is no. All right, x squared equals negative 25. Again, I'm just going to square root both sides. Now how am I getting an I? That is because, and again, let me grab my little pen here. If we simply square root both sides, I'm getting plus minus the square root of negative 25, right? And so we pull out our I like we've been doing, and we evaluate the square root of 25. Okay? And then number 3 down here, given x minus 4 squared equals 12, how am I going to solve that? Well, like I've been doing, I'm going to square root both sides, all right? So I square root the 12 with my plus minus in front, and I still have this x minus 4 over here. I don't really care about x minus 4, I only care about x. So I am going to have to add this 4 over to the right side. Now, the question is, how does the square root of 12 become 2 the square root of 3? Keep in mind, the square root of 12 is the square root of 4 times 3. And we know what the square root of 4 is, it's 2. And so that's how I'm getting the 2 the square root of 3. All right, so does the square root property still have you confused? And this can be a little bit difficult sometimes to pick up on. Have no fear. I have made a couple example videos for you guys, so just be sure to check them out, and as always, ask me if you have questions. All right, but let's talk about what you guys are really going to use a lot of, and that is the quadratic formula. When everything else fails, you can always solve any quadratic equation by the quadratic formula. All right, and I'm sure some of you sing songs to this formula growing up, but it is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, thank goodness you are listening to this lecture, because it is absolutely vital that you notice that the fraction bar extends under the minus b. For some reason, you guys don't draw that fraction bar the whole way across sometimes. So just as extra special attention, make sure you're extending that fraction bar. All right, so let's talk about the quadratic formula. Let's go through the steps with an example, and then I actually have a couple more in the example videos that you can check out. All right, so we start out with this x squared minus 4x equals negative 2. All right, the very first thing we have to do, and you guys, this is so important, you cannot just start solving until you have 0 on one side of the equation. And so for me to get 0 on one side of the equation, I have to move the 2 to the other side. All right, and so that is my first step, to add 2 to both sides. And so I can actually figure out what is my A, what is my B, and what is my C. All right, my A is going to be 1, my B is negative 4, and my C is positive 2. All right, and so I'm using this A, B, and C, and I'm substituting into the quadratic formula. All right, so I just plug directly in. Now be careful here. We keep this negative in front of the B. All right, so you can see where I keep my negative, and then I just plug in whatever B is. And so here I'm actually getting a double negative. It's going to end up being negative negative or becoming positive. Okay, and so now that I've plugged everything in, I can start solving. All right, and so you can see how, let's see here, I have squared my negative 4 rather. I have multiplied 4 and 2 to do minus 8. All right, and so what I'm getting here is 4 plus the square root of 8 all over 2. All right, so how out of that am I getting 2 plus the square root of 2? All right, for starters, we can simplify the square root of 8. Keep in mind the square root of 8 is the square root of 4 times 2. All right, which is going to give us 2 the square root of 2. All right, and I still have my 4. And like I talked about in complex variables or complex numbers, is we want to write this as 2 fractions rather than 1. And when I write this as 2 fractions, we can see how the fractions simplify, and I do in fact end up with 2 plus the square root of 2. Okay? All right, and of course 2 minus the square root of 2, because we have the 2 solutions. We have the plus minus. Sometimes students get confused in my math lab. They're like, hey Angie, where's the plus minus symbol? Well, there is no plus minus symbol. It just means you're going to have to type in your answer twice. We have the 2 plus the square root of 2, and we have the 2 minus the square root of 2.